What if I told you that one of the greatest boxers of all time wasn't just a champion in the ring, but also a man who walked away from it all, only to return and shock the world? Today's story is about a guy who once couldn't afford a proper meal but was so angry that he ended up winning a heavyweight championship. Big George Foreman tells the incredible true story of a man who went from a struggling childhood to becoming an Olympic gold medalist and world heavyweight champion, only to leave it all behind after a near-death experience. But life had other plans. When financial struggles hit, George made one of the most unbelievable comebacks in sports history, proving that age is just a number. How did this happen? Let's find out in the story ahead. The story begins with George and his family moving into a new house. The house's condition is terrible. There's no electricity and barely enough food to eat. Despite this, George's mother tells him they should be grateful to God. At bedtime, George's mother advises him not to get into any fights on his first day of school. She knows he is already nervous about the new environment. The next day at school, everyone stares at George because of his face and large body. In class, when George tries to answer the teacher's questions, she doesn't let him respond. During lunch, he sits alone without eating anything while other kids enjoy their meals. A student mocks George, making him angry, and he ends up getting into a fight. When the teacher arrives, George runs away. Years later, George and his friend are shown near a bar where a drunk man steps out. They decide to rob him, but soon realize he is a police officer setting a trap for them. A police car arrives, and George is chased. He hides in a pipe. The police use a dog to track him down, but to escape, George covers himself in sewer filth. Eventually, the police fail to find him. While heading home, George sees an advertisement for an institute that provides free food and accommodation. However, this place also discovers people's talents and helps them improve in exchange for working for them. George tells his mother about it and expresses his desire to join. Encouraged by his mother, he gets permission to go. The next day, he arrives at the institute and is given a uniform. He notices his new shoes, which his mother had bought for him with great effort. Suddenly, his roommate starts playing loud music, annoying George, who then shuts it off. Later, he finds that his shoes are missing. He gets upset because his mother had saved money for a long time to buy them. Eventually, George and his roommate become friends and start eating together. During lunch in the dining hall, he spots a thief wearing his stolen shoes. Furious, he chases after him. The thief runs into a room and locks the door. But George, determined to catch him, breaks the door down and fights with him. The situation worsens until a man named Broadus arrives just in time to stop the fight. Seeing the broken door, he is shocked. Broadus takes George with him and luckily has his file. He already knows that George has been in fights before. Broadus gives George money for a ticket to go back home, but George pleads with him. He tells him that this institute is his last chance, and he has no other option but to stay. Moved by his words, Broadus felt sympathy for him and lets him stay. After observing George, Broadus recognizes his talent and strength. He offers him a place in the club and reveals that he is a coach. George agrees and starts training in the gym. He faces off against a new boxer but fails to compete, leading to people making fun of him. Embarrassed, he steps out of the ring and takes his frustration out on a punching bag, hitting it so hard that it falls, surprising everyone with his strength. However, Broadus focuses on training him properly with the right techniques and continues to motivate him. To share the news about his boxing training, George calls his mother. She advises him to avoid getting into fights, but he reassures her that boxing is just a sport played by the rules. Later, George faces the same person he met in the gym before. Their fight begins, and George easily defeats him, making him fall to the ground. Impressed by George's performance and dedication, Broadus believes he has great potential. But when George asks about participating in tournaments, Broadus tells him the competition is a year away. He also says that George is not yet ready and needs at least 5 years of hard training. After a year of hard work, George reached a level in the sport that usually takes 5 years. A year later, we see George participating in a tournament, where he faces a Russian boxer. Meanwhile, George's family watches him on TV, but his mother is not happy with his decision to pursue boxing. She worries for him. As the fight begins, the crowd cheers for George. After facing his opponent several times in the ring, George secures an easy victory, something that seemed impossible for others. Today, he won a gold medal. Overjoyed, he lifts the American flag. His family is incredibly proud of his victory. At just 19 years old, he won his first gold medal. The next day, wearing his gold medal, George meets his friends. They question him about racial discrimination, especially against black people, and ask why he raised the American flag despite those issues. This makes George very angry. His mother tries to calm him down and explains things to him. George tells her that he is planning to compete in the next championship belt tournament. One day, George notices a beautiful girl and tries to talk to her. Her name is Paula. Although George is famous, she doesn't seem too interested in talking to him. However, George is very polite, which impresses Paula, and she asks for his number. Later, George works to improve his training by consulting a well-known professional trainer. With this trainer's help, he refines his skills and wins multiple matches, qualifying for the next level. He quickly gains fame and establishes his own identity. As he continues to succeed, he marries Paula. He keeps competing and eventually reaches the final match of a major tournament, the heavyweight title fight. George's opponent is the legendary boxer Joe Frazier, who had defeated Muhammad Ali 2 years earlier. Many people believe George won't stand a chance. The audience chants Joe Frazier's name. As the fight begins, George remembers his trainer's advice. Initially, fighting Joe seems tough, but George gathers his strength and lands powerful punches, knocking Joe down. Everyone is shocked by George's power. In the second round, George stays in control, landing multiple punches. He keeps attacking, and Joe eventually falls to the ground. This gives George the advantage, and he wins the championship. As George becomes even more famous, he meets with a friend and entrusts him with managing his finances. Since his friend is good at math, they form a business partnership. One day, George sees a news segment on TV where Muhammad Ali mocks him. In an interview, Ali even says that he wants to fight George one day and defeat him. To celebrate his success, George buys a big house for his family. He is now a father, but he no longer loves his wife, Paula. His sister, Mary, announces her pregnancy. Problems start growing between George and his wife, as he has begun having affairs with multiple women. Later, George decides to participate in an important tournament where he will finally face Muhammad Ali. Everyone is eagerly waiting for the match. Despite his fame, George remains focused. Many believe that his strength will guarantee him a win against Ali. During the match, George chooses to fight in his style, ignoring Broaddus and his trainer's advice. At the start, he maintains control, but his arrogance distracts him. Muhammad Ali, on the other hand, plays strategically and dominates the match. George's trainer is frustrated by his lack of focus. Ali deliberately tires George out, a tactic that works. George's punches lose their strength, and he is unable to finish the fight. In the end, shocking everyone, Muhammad Ali wins the match. Later, George talks to his family, but his wife tells him she wants a divorce. He visits his mother and tells her that he fired his coaches. He also explains that he held his coaches accountable for his loss. After this, he decided to challenge 5 boxers to prove his strength in front of others. Muhammad Ali was present among the spectators and, as usual, was mocking George. George brought up the idea of a rematch with Ali, but Muhammad Ali refused, saying he doesn't fight defeated men. After the match, Broaddus told George that he had lost his way and urged him to return to his former self. George received a message that made him rush to the hospital. His sister Mary was about to give birth, and her baby's life was in danger. His mother asked him to pray to God. He prayed, asking God to forgive his sins and take his life instead of the newborns. Later, both Mary and her baby survived and were healthy. Even the doctors were surprised. George became convinced that his prayer had reached God and had been answered. Several days passed, and George was seen in the boxing ring again, but he struggled to stay focused. People started saying that after losing to Muhammad Ali, George was not the same anymore. It became clear that he was no longer the boxer he once was. Unfortunately, he lost the match, and his coach Broaddus didn't know how to support him anymore. Out of frustration and anger, George went home and told everyone to stop talking. As soon as he said that, he collapsed. His condition became so serious that he almost died, but miraculously, he survived, shocking everyone. People had assumed he was done for, but his survival filled him with a newfound sense of faith. George went to a church and shared his experiences with a group of people. He emphasized his belief that God is always with us. He decided to retire from boxing and dedicate his life to serving God and the church. When he stepped out of the church and told Broaddus about his decision, he couldn't believe it. Broaddus tried to convince him to change his mind and return to boxing, but George remained firm in his decision. Later, he met Muhammad Ali again, and they became friends, starting a new chapter in their lives. George sought forgiveness from his wife for his past mistakes. She forgave him, but she refused to return to him. At church, he met a woman who won his heart, and once again, he found himself falling in love. He stood in front of the church with a microphone and shared his faith in God with passers-by. After that, he meets the same woman he liked at the church, and they have a conversation. Her name is Mary Joan. Later, he took Mary to see an old church that had been shut down. He decided to reopen it, believing he would become a priest there and help people. Mary supported his faith. 7 years later, he became a priest, guiding people toward better lives and encouraging them to keep their faith in God. One day, a mother asked him to teach her son boxing, but George refused. Time passed, and he was shown living happily with his wife Mary and their children. The entire family was filled with love and joy. On the news, a young boy was shown. His mother had wanted him to learn boxing, but he had been accused of theft. George regretted his decision not to train the boy and felt troubled by the news. He decided to start a boxing club to help children so they wouldn't lose their way. He asked his friend to help him buy an old property for the club, but his friend was not happy with the idea. They renovated the place and made sure everything was in order, but soon they faced financial difficulties. Suddenly, the electricity was cut off because they hadn't paid the bills. This made it difficult to keep the center running. George went to the bank, only to be shocked that his account was completely empty. If he didn't come up with the money, the boxing club would be shut down. His friend had deceived him. He had taken all of George's money and used it elsewhere. George found his friend at a bar, grabbed him, and confronted him. His friend admitted his mistake and apologized. George had no other choice but to return to boxing to save the club. He decided to advertise to raise money, but despite his efforts, it still wasn't enough. The place needed more funds to survive. Forced by circumstances, he realized that boxing was his only option. Mary didn't agree with his decision, but he convinced her. He went to see Broaddus and expressed his intention to return to boxing. Broaddus warned him that he was too old and that his weight would make it very difficult. But George stood firm on his decision. Broaddus suggested that before restarting his training, he should first lose weight. Now, George couldn't even fit into his old training clothes. He started exercising daily, which was not easy for him at all. Despite the struggle, he managed to get back in shape. He then returned to Broaddus to resume his boxing training. George stepped back into the boxing ring. The fight began, and despite the years, George fought well and pulled off a shocking victory. The media started talking about his comeback, and he was featured on television programs. Later, he got a chance to fight for the World Heavyweight Championship. Unfortunately, he lost the match. Despite the loss, he didn't lose courage because he had won people's hearts. With earnings from advertisements and matches, he was able to repay the bank loan. Now, George was set for another big match, this time against a young champion. By now, George was 45 years old, but he trained day and night. His upcoming fight became a global sensation. When the match began, it was tough for George. He missed several punches, but his life experience worked in his favor. One powerful right punch sent his opponent to the ground. The opponent couldn't get back up. George won. He had defied age and expectations. Everyone was overjoyed by his victory. He had once again become a boxing champion. He won the World Heavyweight Championship. His mother was proud of him. He thanked God, and he also thanked Broaddus. He became the first boxer to hold the World Heavyweight Championship title at this age. He lost this title 20 years ago, and today, he won it again. Your age doesn't decide your victory, but your determination does. This story ends right here. What do you think was the most inspiring part of George Foreman's journey? Let us know in the comments. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more amazing content. Hit the bell icon to stay updated on our latest uploads.